Alright, mic is hot, speakers is off, everything else set to silent. Are we good to go? It's been so long since I did one of these lectures on Saturday. It's been like 2 weeks now? Yeah, it's been a while. Alright, everything looks good though, so let's get rid of the starting soon. And we'll get to starting now. Hello, Shadowcat back, and today I wanted to build upon something I touched upon before, and I want to talk about kind of foundational issues. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world right now, and a lot of it is a lot more topical, and I've got opinions on it too. Like, if I wanted to follow in the footsteps of everybody else, I'd be talking about Israel and Gaza right now, Palestine, Jews, Hamas, stuff like that, but I mean, if you want opinions on that, you can find them a dime a dozen. If you want information on that, there is none. Because, there's nothing provable. Everybody's got accusations and implications, and nobody has any idea what the hell's going on. So, good luck with that. Instead, I'm not going to do any of that today. I want to go and talk about, ostensibly, Trump. But more importantly, what they're doing to him and the actual further implications of it. Because what they're doing to Trump doesn't really matter. I'm going to be talking about what they're doing to him in terms of things like his properties. Because when we talk about life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness, which was first illustrated by John Locke in, what was it, his second treatise on government, I think? I don't know, I'm not an expert in this stuff. I have a cursory understanding of history and philosophy. It is not comprehensive. But I think it was his second treatise on government, and that was later amended and expanded upon by Thomas Jefferson during the Declaration of Independence. And there is a reason why these things were outlined. And so I want to get into that. And the reason why this stuff was outlined is actually going to go really far back into our discussions that we've had before into cancel culture. Because all of this kind of ties together. And so without further ado, let's go ahead and lay the foundation of what we're talking about today. By the way, I don't think this is going to be a terribly long lecture. I usually allocate about 2 hours for my lectures. I start at 10 o'clock Eastern Time in the US, and I just mean Eastern Time because we have daylight savings time here, so just to keep people from getting confused. And I usually allocate up to noon Eastern Time in the US for this. But today, this is not exactly a long and complicated topic. I don't know how much further over like an hour I'll go. And I do see that I have people in chat. JP and Tux are the MVPs here, okay? They were here before the stream even started. And I don't mean like a minute before. I don't mean 2 minutes before. I don't know how long they were in there because I went to start the stream, like get OBS connected to YouTube through all the pipes and everything, and they were already here. I mean, I don't know why you don't have anything better to do on a Saturday, but I'm glad that whatever you don't have to do on Saturday, you're spending your time with me instead. That touches me right here in the chest. Gives me tingly feelings. And JP says, I just realized the biggest nerd I know called me a nerd. I'm gonna take that as a compliment. Tux says, Mike is hot. Be careful with that. Maybe use some... hold on. I actually do have oven mitts right here. Got my mitts. I mean, you can't see them, but I got my mitts here. See? Mitts here. We're good. Okay. Oh, and I'm actually not holding the mic either. I have a nice little boom arm. Not an expensive one, but it works. It's kind of squeaky now. Yeah, see? Kind of squeaky now. It's not one of the fancy pneumatic ones. Like, that'd be a dream. If I ever make it on YouTube and I become big and successful and everything, I'm getting one of those fancy air cylinder mic boom arms that are silent when you move them. But no, I have one that's controlled by springs and stuff. So, squeaky. Gotta be really careful not to move it too much. Otherwise, you know, then it's gonna squeak. And you'll hear that. And that's bad for me. But yeah. There's actually a lot of things I need to upgrade still. Like, I wanna get, like, a webcam thing going. I need to get, like, a green screen and everything as well. Future plans. Future plans. JP says this is the ASMR episode. What? ASMR? No, you're supposed to be paying attention to this one. Okay? This is not a bedtime story. Pay attention. Alright. So, the first thing that I want to talk about, just to lay the foundations for what we're doing today. Where's my browser? There it is. Okay. So, this is just a quick refresher. This is from back in September, I believe. Is there a date on this article? It's the New York Times. Expecting them to do things like put dates on things may be a bit too much. Here we go. Published September 26th. So, almost a month ago. Obviously, there have been developments in the story since then. They're going back and forth. There's appeals. There's challenges. I'm not going to touch any of that. I don't care. It's not relevant today. All we need to know is that a judge has ruled that Trump committed fraud. They say that he overvalued many of his properties and that they're going to strip the properties. They're going to be auctioned off. All of his business licenses are being canceled, and basically they're going to strip away his entire business as a real estate mogul, okay? So everything he spent his entire life building, they're going to say, you know what, we're going to take the foundation out of it and watch the entire building crumble. And why did I say that, you know, we're going to talk about this, but it also doesn't matter? Well, it's Trump. He's one of the wealthiest people in the world. It's not like he's going to be living under a bridge. So, is this bad? It's absolutely bad. But is it really going to hurt him that much in the long term? Not really. He'll be valued now at, you know, several $100 million instead of a couple of $1 billion. I know they may have to pass up on the solid gold silverware. Shame. Blizzard's in the chat. Hello, Blizz. So, Trump is going to be fine, no matter what they do to him. But what about other people? The fact is that when Trump got into office, what was it, 2017? He was sworn in, I believe. One of the things that he said during his tenure there is the fact that they're not after him. They're after you. And he's simply in the way. That was something that resonated with a lot of people. And it resonated for the fact that it's true. They are after you. And he was in the way. He's no longer in the way now. However, he could be again, which is why they need to do everything they can to stop him, to punish him, to remove him from the equation, so that they can get back to you. And when we talk about the ideas of life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness, because these things are both intertwined, the fact is that if they can do it to him, they can do it to you, and they will. So why don't we get into like the foundational principles of what was talked about. We'll discuss the circumstances in which they were done, the implications of when they were implemented, and we'll move on from there. Because I really do not want to discuss Trump all day. And Tuck says, squeaky, squeaky, squeak. I actually understood that. I haven't seen the entirety of The Emperor's New Groove, but I understood that part. I am not fluent in Squirrel, though. I only took a night class. Okay. So, this is not the entire Declaration of Independence. The entire Declaration of Independence is much longer. This is just an excerpt from it. And this is just a slide that I pulled off of a Google image search. So don't blame me for the font. I would have picked something more fun. But it said, this is an excerpt, and it says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. If you are an American citizen and you went to school here in America, you have heard this at least once. Probably several times over several years. But that's not a bad thing. It's important to know and understand the foundational documents of the country if you want to uphold the country itself." Now, when JP says Tux is speaking boom mic. Fair enough. Alright, so we're going to be talking about the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness today. Or more specifically, this was an expansion upon, as I said before, Locke's ideas of life, liberty, and property. And so we'll get into that a little bit. I have it right here. There's Locke. It's a tiny picture, but, you know, it's fine. I didn't open up the actual page because everything we need is right here. Locke said among the fundamental natural rights are life, liberty, and property. Locke believed that the most basic human law of nature is the preservation of mankind. To serve that purpose, he reasoned individuals have both a right and a duty to preserve their own lives. Now, this is where I want to get into this concept of natural rights, natural law, and I want to talk about cancel culture again, just briefly. We're not going to get into a long diatribe on that again. This idea, though, of natural rights and natural law. One of the things that we often forget, and we have to be reminded of constantly, is that human beings are animals. We like to believe that we are far removed from the beasts of the world and from our natural environment because we are greatly superior to it. But superior to it does not mean removed. Kings of old used to think themselves superior to the peasantry and the people, and this usually lasted long enough for them to be brought down and then beheaded by that very same peasantry, because while they thought they were superior, and in a certain respect they were not removed from the system. This is why good kings prospered, bad kings died. The same is true with humans and nature. Any good human who lives in harmony with nature will tend to flourish. Those who either disrespect or disregard nature tend not to. Especially with the disregard part. I mean, that one is just hilariously bad. All you gotta do is look up some YouTube videos of guests in, like, Yellowstone Park, where you literally have signs posted everywhere in Yellowstone Park. Do not interact with the wildlife. And yet every single year, somebody gets trampled to death or gored or mauled by a buffalo. Okay, it's a buffalo. It's a giant cow. You just got killed by nature's giant dairy cow. Now, if that is not enough of an example just to show that we are not that far removed from nature, I don't know what is. And Tuck says, if this is successful and Trump still has an appeal it's likely to succeed, in my opinion, it's bad for New York. Why do you think Trump cares about New York so much as president? He has, or had, rather, businesses there. He still has an appeal. His appeal will fail. Because when you appeal, your appeal goes back to the same judge that made the previous ruling. And since the previous judge made the ruling in summary, which means that Trump wasn't even required to be present. He wasn't allowed to produce evidence. He wasn't allowed to argue his case. Yeah, I don't know. That judge is not going to care about his appeal. Now, I do think that you're right. He is likely to succeed. But most likely, it's going to have to go to, let's see, in New York, they're backwards. So I think he would have to escalate it to a district court. Because I think superior courts are the lowest level in New York. I think district court is the next one up. And if he fails in district court, he will then probably have to take it to the Supreme Court, which I do believe is where he is almost guaranteed to win. So, yeah. He's going to have to go through several appeals, and he's going to fail several appeals before I do believe he succeeds. As for why does he care so much about New York, I think he kind of cares about everyone. He seems to be just that kind of guy. I think he thinks that he does better if everyone does better, and so he really wants everyone to do better. But that's kind of the mindset of the businessman. I mean, if nobody has money, then nobody has money to give him, right? JP says Darwinism says you. Get out of the gene pool. I love Darwinism at work. I really do. And Tuck says you were behind. I don't know why you were so far behind. I hope you can get caught up, though. I have faith in you. So anyway, back to what I was saying. Natural rights, natural law. Humans are not removed from the laws of nature. And so, since we are not removed from the laws of nature, we really, really need to abide by them. And that does mean we need to abide by natural rights. Now, what are natural rights? Well, natural rights are just that. It's a self-defining word. They are rights given to you by nature, or at least by naturally existing. So, what are your natural rights? Well, your natural rights include the ability to move. You are naturally free to move. You have legs. And with your legs, you are allowed to go as far as your legs will allow you to go. You are allowed to do things. If you see a stick on the ground, you are allowed to pick up the stick. If you see a tree, you're allowed to climb the tree. If you see a cave, you're allowed to enter the cave. You are allowed to do these things. And by the way, if you picked up the stick and you decided, you know what? This is a good stick. I'm going to keep this stick. This is now my stick. You have a right to keep the stick. These are natural rights because there is no reason why you can't do these things until we introduce something else into the environment. So, natural rights is anything that you can do while you are standing in the middle of a forest all by yourself with no other people, animals, nothing. This is one of the reasons why we say in the First Amendment of the United States, you have the First Amendment freedoms. That is to say, you have the freedom of speech. You have the freedom of religion. You have the freedom of the press. You have the freedom of petition. And you have the freedom of assembly. Why? Because these are derived from natural rights. The rest of them are too, to some extent. But we'll get to that in a bit later. I'll go ahead and throw the Second Amendment in there as well. You have the right to self-protection. Again, I will bring up stick. You are allowed to use that stick. It's your stick. However, if you are in the middle of a forest all by yourself, you are allowed to say whatever you want to say. You are allowed to worship whatever you want to worship. If you brought friends with you, you are allowed to assemble with your friends. If you want to write a blog on the back of some tree bark, you're allowed to do that. And, I mean, if you want to write a petition while you're out there, go for it. In our example of you standing in the middle of the forest, there's no one to submit it to. But you're allowed to. And again, Second Amendment, stick. You have a stick. You are allowed to use your stick to defend yourself. Now, why do we want to discuss these things in such a way? Well, let's take the human element out of it. Let's pick an animal. Pick an animal. Let's go with the buffalo, okay? Since we already used the buffalo earlier. What rights does a buffalo have? Okay? A lot of people would knee-jerk and just say, well, a buffalo doesn't have any rights. Or some people actually might come out and say, buffaloes actually have more rights than people do. They're a protected species. Either way, though... Tuck said cat. Sorry, we already picked one. I went with buffalo. We're not doing cats and penguins. So anyway, what rights does the buffalo have? Well, the buffalo has the freedom of movement. It has legs. It can go wherever it wants. It has the natural right of speech, to the extent that any buffalo has the right of speech. I don't know what sound a buffalo makes, but I'm sure they make several of them. Does a buffalo have the right to assemble? They sure do. They travel in herds. Do they have the right to worship? I don't think they do, but if they ever wanted to, I'm sure they could. As long as it's not Scientology. I mean, I might amend it for Scientology. Does a buffalo have the right to petition? It is. They're just really bad at exercising it. And do they have the right to the press? Second verse, same as the first. I have yet to see a newspaper from a herd of buffalo. But if anybody wants to leave a typewriter out there for them, I suppose if you get enough of them together, they might actually produce Shakespeare. I don't know, maybe you gotta use monkeys for that. But they have all the same natural rights that we would if we were standing out in the middle of a forest. These are natural laws. Now, so far, we have discussed the life and liberty part of that, and we touched lightly upon the property part of that. But that's where I want to get to now, okay? The fundamental natural rights, according to Locke, are life, liberty, and property. So we talked about the liberty part. Actually, I skipped on the life part. I skipped the life part entirely. The right to life, okay? You have a right to live. Nobody else has a right to kill you. That isn't to say that nobody's going to try. Of course people are going to try, but nobody has a right to kill you where you just have to throw your hands up and say, oh, well, sorry, I forgot. Your rights actually supersede mine. I guess my life belongs to you now. And then you just let them kill you because that's apparently what we have to do now. No, that doesn't happen. There's not a single animal in the world, not a single one, except for maybe the hognose snake, but that's because they're adorable and they don't know what they're doing. There's not a single animal in the world that just throws up its hands and say, well, might as well die. No, no animal does that. If one animal wants to take the life of another one, they have a fight. And that's where the whole Second Amendment and the right to self-defense comes in, as well as touching on that right to property that we mentioned before. Some animals actually do have sticks. It's mostly some of your higher primates. But whatever they have, they will use it to defend their life. So why don't we get into the property part then, since these two things kind of dovetail together. We've already established you have the right to a stick to defend yourself, or just to keep it because, you know, it's your stick though. But property. Now, what if we simply replace the word property with territory? Okay? The idea of an animal having property is kind of weird. We don't really consider animals to have property because, well, when we think of property, we think of houses, we think of lawns, we think of barns and garages, we think of office buildings, post offices, we think of properties. Nicely divvied up, cut out, you know, stored at the local town hall. Something that's been surveyed and quantified and everything else. But property could also just mean territory. And does an animal have a right to territory? Well, yes. In fact, it's one of the most important things to an animal. Whether it happens to be a buffalo, or it happens to be a wolf pack, or it happens to be, I don't know, a raptor like a hawk. All of these animals have territories. And do they have a right to their territory? Well, yes, they do. This is a natural right that has been in effect since forever. They have a natural right to their territory and everything in their territory, so long as they can hold it. Now, that last part dovetails back in with the first part, the life. Life and property are very tightly intertwined, which is the real crux of today's discussion as a whole, and we'll get to that in a moment. But any animal, such as a wolf pack, has a right to its territory. They go through, they mark the territory, and then they patrol the territory. I'm actually going to go with lions on this one because it's a very, very interesting case. I actually saw a video on Facebook. Don't ask me to find it, I'll never find it again. But it was a video of male lions. And it was male lions going hunting and taking down prey. And it was fun to read the comments under that, because there were a large number of people who did not believe what they saw, or they just spent their entire comment section space deriding male lions because, well, what is the one thing that we know about lions besides the fact that they're the king of the jungle, even though they don't live in the jungle? Well, it's the idea that male lions don't do anything. After all, it's the female lions that do the hunting, and they hunt as a pride. Everybody knows that. Even little school children know that. Male lions don't do anything. Well, that's not correct. While it is true that the female lions are the primary hunters, the male lions do not just lay around all day. Male lions are responsible for the territory in which the lionesses hunt. And so the daily life of a male lion usually involves waking up early, long walks through the Serengeti, and the occasional fight with any other animal that tends to wander into that territory, whether that be another lion, a hyena, or a jaguar, or whatever. No, wait, jaguar, that'd be Central America. Africa. Leopards. If a leopard happened to wander into the territory. The male lions are responsible for making sure that all of those guys stay out. So this idea of property is ingrained into all animals, and that everything inside this property, whether that be the game they need to eat, the water they need to drink, the trees or rocks that they use as shelter, everything inside this territory belongs to them. And if you ever want to test that, go look for a bear den and walk into that. See how the bear responds. By the way, make sure you have your will properly filled out and filed before you do that. And that was not advice, okay? YouTube, I didn't just advise people to go into a bear den. In fact, I would advise against it. Because you know what's going to happen. That den belongs to the bear. So we've established the idea of territory and how territory, property, and life are linked. And then we've established liberty, the things that you are allowed to do just by natural law. And we can see how these things all kind of coalesce together into being your fundamental natural rights, as illustrated by John Locke. You have a right to all of these things because these things are your life. The reason why I wanted to have this discussion today is because all of these things are intertwined, and if you remove any one of them, you simultaneously remove the other two. Think of it like a three-legged stool. You have life, liberty, and property as each one of the legs. If you remove one of them, the stool falls over. A two-legged stool cannot stand. It's got to have all three. So, how is that the case? Well, let's take them away and see what happens to the other one. Let's start with the first and easiest one, life. If I take away your right to life, and in fact, I take away your life in general, what good is your liberty and your territory or your property to you when you're dead? It's not a trick question, I promise. The answer is, it's not. It does you absolutely no good. It doesn't help you at all. You're dead. Okay. So, like I said, that was the easiest one. What about the next one? Liberty, okay? We already established what liberty is. Liberty is the right to travel. Liberty is the right to expression. It is the right to speech. It is the right to worship. The right to assemble. So what if we take those liberties away from you? You cannot move anymore. You can't move, you can't speak, you can't assemble, you can't worship, you can't do anything, okay? You have no more liberties. Everything that you do will either be, punished, or everything you do will be dictated to you before you're allowed to do it. Okay, well, if you can't move, then you cannot acquire property. Not just territory, but the basic essentials that you need to live. If you cannot travel, you cannot get food, you cannot get water, you cannot get shelter, and as we've established before in these videos, food, water, and shelter, those are kind of your basic necessities. Let's remember our survival rules of 3, and I will repeat these as often as I can. If I could put this on a shirt and sell it, I would. 3 minutes without air. 3 hours without shelter. 3 days without water. 3 weeks without food. And you're dead. And if we take away your liberty and your ability to even get those things, or much less get to those things, then your right to life basically doesn't exist, because you'll die. Oh, and JP says, I think this is for the buffaloes. Buffaloes have the right to personal space with goring noises. They do definitely make headlines, though. That's fair. That's fair. Buffaloes have one hell of a publicist. And Tuck says, that statue in the middle of the field is my property. Even after I die, I will maintain my dignity and prestige for all eternity. Wait, don't knock it down! That's a different issue, though. We'll get to it, though. So anyway, liberty. The need for you to assemble, to just express yourself however you want to. Then we get to property. Okay, the right to property. Now, property, of course, can be two things. Property can be territory, as we established before, or it can be the things inside that territory. The food in that territory, the water in that territory, the shelter in that territory. If we take away your right to property and say you can be on this land, but you're not allowed to actually touch anything in this land, then what good does your liberty do you if you can't do anything while you're there? And what good does your life do you if you're not allowed to sustain it? Similarly, though, your right to territory. If you are not allowed to have territory at all, then you cannot acquire property, you cannot sustain life, and everything else is meaningless without that. Which is why I have stated before when we talked about cancel culture, that is actually the goal of cancel culture. I've stated it before. Cancel culture's ultimate goal is murder. It's murder in the most indirect way, though. It's murder in the same way a drowning person could be murdered. If you were there on a boat, you saw the person drowning, And you didn't help them, but instead you just, every time they would reach for like a flotation ring, you would just pull them back. You wouldn't actually touch the ring. Or maybe you would touch the ring. Maybe you just pull the ring away from them a little bit. And you would just keep pulling the ring away a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit more, until they eventually get tired, sink, and drown. Did you kill them? No, of course not. You didn't actually touch them at all. But you prevented them from being able to acquire the thing they needed to live. You could do the same thing if you just, I don't know, say got somebody fired from their job and then made them unhireable anywhere in the city. If somebody was, say, I don't know, let's call them some kind of stockbroker, okay? So somebody who earns, a nice mid-six-figure income, and you get them, you pull up some kind of dirt on them or a bad tweet they had, you get them canceled, you threaten their company, and you get them fired, okay? So now they're nice, mid-six-figure income, gone. So instead they say, well, fine, you know what? I know finances. I'll go become a teacher. I'll teach financial stuff in high school. I'll teach economics. And so they get a job as an economics teacher. But then you hound that person to the school and say, guess what? They got fired from this other job for doing this thing. See? Here's what they said in a tweet. Here's what they put on Facebook, okay? See, they're a bad person. And guess what? If you hire them, we'll make sure that everybody knows that you hired them. And we'll get them to come after you too. So you get them fired from the school. And they say, well, my entire economics career is over, but I need a job. I'm going to go work at McDonald's and flip burgers and dunk fries. So they get a job at McDonald's, but then you hound them to McDonald's. And you say, did you know that you have a bad person working at McDonald's? Okay? And we're going to tell everyone that there's a bad person working at McDonald's. And if you keep them working here, you're going to be bad people too. So you get them fired from McDonald's. That's the idea of cancel culture. You're not allowed to have property. You're not allowed to have territory. Because if you don't have a job, how are you paying for your house? How are you paying for your water? How are you paying for your food? How do you pay for anything without money? You can't. And so by stripping property away from people, you can also strip their liberty and their lives. This is one of the reasons why the idea of property taxes are so contentious inside the United States. It's because, according to Locke, which Jefferson based the parts of the Declaration of Independence on, you have a right to your property. Property taxes, however, tell you that if you don't pay your property taxes, it's not your property. And if something can be taken from you, then it was never yours to begin with. So do you have a right to property or not? Well, according to natural law, you do. We've just complicated it. And now, by being able to take, property away from people, you can essentially just strip everything. It is the slowest, outside of, a life term in prison, and that's something I also have contentions with, but that's not the subject for today. But outside of that, it is the slowest and probably the most painful way to kill somebody, is to just exile them, hound them to the ends of the earth until, much like primeval humans walking an animal to death, they simply drop on the spot and give up living. That is cancel culture in a nutshell. It is the modern day way for people on the internet, in the cities, just in society in general, to walk you to death like a hunted animal. Has to be said. So this is John Locke, and we're going to move on here. We're going to get to Thomas Jefferson instead, because Thomas Jefferson modified it. This, of course, is from the National Archives. This is just an excerpt from the Declaration of Independence. We already read this before. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal, endowed by their Creator. And here we go. When we say endowed by their Creator, right there, that is saying natural law. Whether you believe God exists and created the world and everything in it, or you believe in the Darwinian idea of evolution, that the world existed and that life, through struggle, came to be as it is today. Whatever path you take, we are still talking about natural law. Endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, natural rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, one of the things that's a little bit contentious, and that's because Thomas Jefferson is slightly dead. He's a little dead, and so we cannot ask him directly what he thought about this, is why did he change it from life, liberty, and property to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? The answer to that is actually very simple, although the reasons for doing it are not. One of the most commonly held assumptions for why he changed this was slavery. And it's a pretty good argument. One of the reasons why it's assumed that he did this is because there was slavery during the American Revolution. It did not grow to the scale that it was before the U.S. Civil War, the first Civil War at least. But we did have slavery here, and so it was, according to Jeffersonian scholars, of which I am not, but according to them, one of the reasons that it was changed is because he was afraid that if he left it as life, liberty, and property, since slaves were considered property, that it would further enshrine slavery into the United States, something that none of the Founding Fathers were too terribly enamored with. And I know I will inevitably get somebody who will stumble across this video and come at me saying, yeah, but didn't most of the Founding Fathers own slaves? Yeah, many of them did. It was the times. But they did their best to kind of limit that. And by putting in the pursuit of happiness instead of property, they did lay the foundation for when that would eventually be overturned. But that wasn't the only reason. And I would dare say it was probably not even the primary reason. And the reason for that is this. If you are American and you remember studying the Constitution in school, you will remember that the First Amendment is your freedom of expression. The Second Amendment is your freedom of self-defense. The Third Amendment, however, is the one that most people ignore, and that is the protection from quartered soldiers. The Third Amendment states that the government is not allowed to quarter soldiers in your home. Now, this was instituted because during, or at least before, the American Revolution, when Britain would send over redcoats, they would send over the regulars. Those people would need a place to stay. However, most of them being military officials were not going to be staying in the colonies. They would be there for a period of months, and then they would go home. Most of them, they were going to be there for a period of years. If they would get their own home Why? Primarily because they would want their own home. And if you were, established there permanently, you would, of course, have your own home. But for soldiers who were simply passing through, if they were there on a rotation, or if they were traveling from, say, New York to Virginia, if you happened to live in one of the towns along the way, you could have regulars knock on your door, say, "We need a place to sleep. We're taking your house for the night." Or the week. Or the month. Doesn't really matter, because we're taking your house and there's nothing you can do about it. This was a thing that happened quite often wherever they were traveling. And so they made sure that they put this in the Constitution that you can't do that. Tuck says, you play on the board you're given. If that board includes slavery, you do slavery, because not doing it will result in you losing the game. Once you win the game, you might change the rules. Not a bad example, not the best example though, because there were many people who didn't do slavery who did still prosper. But I do understand what you're trying to say there. It's not the worst example I've heard. I have heard worse. So anyway, they made sure to put in the Third Amendment you can't quarter soldiers. But there's more to that amendment than is just what is written in the plain text. See, the fact is that a soldier is an asset of the government, okay? The soldier goes where the government tells them to go, they do what the government tells them to do, and they act as the outstretched hand or fist of the government. And so if a soldier comes to you and says that we're taking your house, that is no different than the government coming to do that. And if the government can tell you that it's going to put soldiers in your house, what else can the government tell you to do with your house? Or with your barn? Or with your land in general? The truth is that the Third Amendment is the protection from anybody telling you what you must do with your property. Hence the pursuit of happiness. You are allowed to have life, okay? In fact, it is your right to life. You have been given life by the Creator, by nature, and it is your life to keep by any and all means necessary. This means that you are allowed to kill to preserve your own life. You can take a life to preserve your own. That means that if somebody comes and tries to take your life, you are allowed to take theirs first. And that also extends to hunting. You are allowed to take the life of an animal to preserve your own. Now that animal is allowed to fight back because it is also allowed to fight for its life. It's just that we as humans are a lot better at doing it. You have, of course, your right to liberty, to express yourself however you want, and pursuit of happiness, which means that not only are you allowed to have property, not only are you allowed to have territory, but you are allowed to do with your property and your territory that which suits you. The government cannot tell you what you must do with your property. Your neighbors cannot tell you what you must do with your property. The church cannot tell you what you must do with your property. It is yours to use in your pursuit of happiness. You are allowed to use your property to shelter yourself, to water yourself, to feed yourself, and beyond those things, to do whatever makes you flourish, which is to say, raise a family, have kids, produce the next generation. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are the keys to not just individual satisfaction, but the continuation of the species as a whole. And that is why it is so very important, because if you take away the pursuit of happiness from that and you simply make it property, let's see. Oh, I missed a couple. Let's see. JP says sometimes the board game is walking the plank. Okay, that's fair. Tux also says there's a video of a bow hunter hunting a moose. Okay, that's stupid in general. Why would you bow hunt a moose? Okay, the only thing I'm going hunting for a moose, or I'm hunting a moose with, is an anti-tank rifle. I mean, I gotta wonder, people who are going bow hunting for moose, have you ever actually seen a moose? Have you been close enough to a moose? I am not hunting a moose with anything other than high caliber. I'm starting at 50 and I'm going up. Tux says there's a video of a bow hunter hunting a moose. The moose looks at him, dude fires the bow. Okay, wrong terminology. You don't fire a bow. There's no fire involved. You loose the arrow. The moose charges full throttle at him. Antlers caught the tree, but the hunter almost got hunted. Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. You are allowed to hunt to feed yourself. They are allowed to defend themselves. It is the right to self-defense, and it is ingrained in every living creature on the planet. Except for hognose snakes. But that's why they're the best snakes. That's why they're the only snake I'll ever have. But any other animal knows self-defense. And the idea that we can regulate self-defense is an offensive one. I'm not going to say laughable because we've done it. The idea that you cannot carry a knife over a certain length, to say nothing of a sword, axe, warhammer, spear, pike, halberd, any edged weapon, edged or pointed weapon that they deem is unlawful, is offensive. The idea that you are not allowed to have any firearm you want, with any capacity or any rate of fire or any caliber, is offensive. You have a right to self-defense, not by the government, not by the city, not by society, by the laws of nature themselves. You are allowed, when your life is threatened, to fight for your life by any means necessary. This is not Queensberry rules. We're not boxing here. JP, I will ban you from this chat. Don't test me. But you are allowed to defend yourself by any means necessary. That means if you got a bite, if you got a scratch, if you have to eye gouge, whatever it is in a fight, you do it because you're fighting for your life. If you don't do everything you can, then you're basically just surrendering your life. And I mean that's your right to do. But it's kind of antithetical to your right to life. Okay, JP, we're going to have this talk. You're going to interrupt my entire lecture here with this. I don't care if you use a crossbow. I don't care if it's a pistol grip. It's called firing because you use fire. You fire a flintlock. You fire a cannon. You fire a gun because when the what's it called? The pin strikes the primer, it ignites the powder. It's fire. You do not fire a bow. or a crossbow, or a sling, or a catapult, or a trebuchet. You don't fire these things because most of them are made out of wood. You loose them. Tuck says you nock an arrow. Yes, you nock an arrow, you draw a bow, and you loose the arrow. Or bolt, or bullet, or boulder, or whatever you happen to be throwing. You loose it. And why do you loose it? Because when you draw it, these string or ropes or whatever are under tension. They're tight. Then you loose it. You let go and it goes slack again. Or at least as slack as any bow is going to get. They're already kind of under tension. I know my terminology. Don't test me on this. Now, where was I? Right, I was talking about self-defense, which I just had to defend myself against people in my own chat. See? I told you. Any means necessary. That's it. Tux is banned. I'm getting rid of Tux now. Banned from the chat. Banned from the Discord. Banned from anything else. Like if I'm going to come looking for you. I am going to be your cancel culture. So yes, self-defense. You are allowed to defend yourself however you want to, and that also falls under the pursuit of happiness. Because if you cannot defend yourself, if you cannot defend your property or your territory, then what good does your right to the pursuit of happiness do for you? If you're not allowed to defend yourself, and this is the problem that we're seeing across the US and parts of Canada and the UK and other parts of Europe as well, where people are being told they're not allowed to defend themselves. New Jersey in the US is a great example of this, because New Jersey does not even have the castle doctrine. The castle doctrine, of course, in the US is a widespread law that says that inside of your castle, that is to say your property, you are allowed to defend yourself. You do not have to surrender your property to anybody coming to take it. In New Jersey, however, if you are attacked on the street or in your car, you are expected to flee. You must surrender your property and flee. And this also extends to your own home. If you are invaded, if somebody breaks down your front door, breaks in a window, whatever, you are not allowed to defend your home. You must flee your home. Even if it's the middle of the night, even if you're wearing nothing at all, even if it's the middle of winter, you are not allowed to defend your home against home invaders. You must flee. Unless you are absolutely backed into a corner and are unable to flee at all, then you are allowed to use the absolute minimum amount of force needed to stop yourself from dying. New Jersey is absolutely insane. However, there are lesser examples of this all across most of Western civilization at this point. And it flies in the face of natural law. When we look at all the businesses which are told they're not allowed to actually defend their business when they are being robbed, looted, or their businesses are simply being destroyed. They're not allowed to defend it. Well, what do you think happens to the people afterwards? We go back to the pursuit of happiness. They have acquired their territory and their property, okay? They bought the plot of land that may or may not have had a store on it. They have filled it with trade goods. And the pursuit of happiness comes in when they're trying to trade their goods for other goods. Now, if we got rid of the pursuit of happiness, and we just said you only have a right to property, when that person bought the property, the government could come in and tell them what they have to do with it. It's like, I would like to build a tailor shop and I want to sell clothing. The government could then come in and say, well, I know you want to do that. However, you know what we really need? We really need an armory. So you're going to instead, you're going to make bullets, okay? But I really wanted to have a tailor shop. Nope. You're going to make bullets because we need bullets. And so now the government can bar you from doing anything you want with your store other than making bullets. And they might not even pay you well for it. They might pay you barely enough to cover the expenses of acquiring shells, bullets, powder, primers. And so you can technically survive, you can barely scrape by, but this is not your pursuit of happiness. You technically have your property, you technically have your territory, but you are being told what to do with it. You might also recognize this as something that most communist nations do. Most communist nations would tell you exactly where you're going to live. So you had your territory. They would tell you what kind of building you get to live in, an apartment, a single family home, whatever. So you have your property, but you're not allowed to do anything with it. They tell you where you're going to work. They tell you how much you're going to get. They tell you when you have to do it. And so you don't actually have a right to the pursuit of happiness. You only have a right to exist. And while that's better than having no rights at all, we do aspire to be better. And hence why we have the pursuit of happiness included there in the first place. Let's see. Tuck says, consider that you're going to be pumped up with adrenaline and not exactly capable of making fine decisions at the time. Such laws effectively make self-defense illegal. Yes, they do make self-defense illegal under almost every single circumstance. And that's their point. Technically, they are not allowed to say the Second Amendment does not apply. Because we have to remember the federal structure of at least the United States. I can't speak for other countries, but in the United States, no state is allowed to supersede the Constitution. And the Constitution supersedes all state laws. That's also why we have the 10th Amendment in the Constitution, or at least the 10th right in the Bill of Rights, that says anything not enumerated in the Constitution is a state's right. This is why the two most contentious issues in the United States are so contentious. That being firearms and abortion. The reason being, many states have limitations, and even the federal government has limitations on firearms. Even though the right to self-defense, which you can look in there is nothing in there that says what you must use for self-defense, just the right of self-defense shall not be infringed. They didn't say that your right of self-defense only applies to muskets and, hand-cranked Gatling guns. No, it's just the right of self-defense. It is enumerated in the Constitution, and yet we have many states that abridge it daily. Even the federal government with the NFA, the National Firearms Act, abridges the Constitution at a federal level. Abortion, on the other hand, many people say is a federal issue, and that the federal government should be able to make a law that broadly overrides all states. but it's not actually enumerated in the Constitution, or for that matter, in any federal law. This is why it was actually kicked down to the state level in the, what was it? It was Roe versus something. I don't remember now. Either way, Roe versus Dobbs? Was it Dobbs? I don't know, it's not important. Either way, the Supreme Court kicked it back down to the state level because that's where it belongs. It's not in the Constitution, therefore it's not federal. In fact, it could be argued that there is no such thing as a federal law outside of the Constitution, and that if you want to have a federal law, it must be enshrined in the Constitution. That was the entire purpose of the organization of our country. JP says, careful, we share a border with the insane New Jersey. Crazy can be politically contagious. Saying that as if Pennsylvania isn't already politically crazy. Tux also says, picking out a little mistake after the fact, with days to look at the situation with full knowledge of everything, is effectively finding an excuse to condemn the man for defending themselves. No argument. Not gonna lie, no argument there. I would say that this is where lawyers come into the situation, because a lawyer should be able to easily argue that, but when you also look at the way the New Jersey court system works, you realize that it was decided before anybody actually walked into the courtroom, which is the point. They do everything they can to deny the Second Amendment without ever outright stating it. New Jersey and the Second Amendment is essentially like two kids in the back seat, with one kid waving their hands all over the other one saying, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you. But we know what you're doing. You may not be violating the letter of the law, but you left the spirit of the law looking like Rocky in the first movie. Okay, we know what you're doing. And so that's where the pursuit of happiness came in over the idea of just life, liberty, and property. You needed that there. Otherwise, you got to remember that this was written when the king still controlled the colonies. And he literally could tell you what to do with your property. All the king had to do was send a decree across the ocean, and he could tell every single tailor that they are now going to make only uniforms for the British regulars. Okay, you're not allowed to do anything else. Not even patch jobs, not even repairs. You are only allowed to make uniforms for British regulars. They could send out a missive that says, all the houses in this area are now property of the crown, and they now belong to British regulars inside the colonies. And these things happened. This is why it was enshrined in the Declaration of Independence and sent across the ocean back to the king, saying, we're tired of being told what we can do with our own property. It was our people who came across the ocean to settle here. It was our people who put in the blood, sweat, tears, and gave our lives to build the colonies. We will not be told what we can do with the sweat of our own labor. And that kicked off the entire American Revolution, essentially. I mean, there was more to it than that. Again, I'm not going to get into the history of all of this, but that was essentially it. And that's why that amendment made it in there. Or at least that right made it in there. So, why don't we pull all of this back? We have established now what the natural laws of life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness. We'll take all four of those together. We're going to take the stool from being a three-legged stool to a four-legged stool. Okay? And now we understand how all of these fit together and why they're all important. And we're going to come all the way back to this and why this is so very important. See, it doesn't matter that it's Trump. We could take Trump's name out of the entire thing. You could put in any other name. I kind of wish I could do that. I wonder if there's like a mod that I can put into Chrome. It wouldn't be a Chrome. It'd be an extension. An extension I could put in here, like an add and replace extension to remove the name Trump and just put in John Doe, okay? Because if we took Trump out and put any random person in, if I put JP in here, judge rules JP committed fraud, stripping control of key properties. If I put Tux in there, the judge rules Tux committed fraud, stripping Tux of control of key properties. If I did the same thing with Blizz, it would not change the egregious nature of what is being done. See, it's said, how did that go? It's small minds discuss people, average minds discuss events, large minds discuss ideas. And that's why I want to expand this to the idea of it. It doesn't matter who it's being done to. And as a matter of fact, it only slightly matters what is being done. The fact, though, that the people think they can do it is what's important. Because if they can do this to Trump, what they are essentially saying is that your Third Amendment right to have property and to do what you want with it essentially does not exist. Keep in mind that the reason why this is even an issue is because they say that he overvalued his properties by as much as $2.2 billion. There's two very significant problems with this entire case. The first of which is this. Most people do not seek to overvalue their holdings. The reason being is because if you overvalue your holdings, while it does look good on paper in the short term, it comes to bite you in the back end. Because when you overvalue your properties, especially if you overvalue your properties by $2.2 billion, you actually increase the tax base that you have to pay. So overvaluing your properties is a really, really good way to lose money in the long term. They say that he overvalued his property so he could defraud the bank, saying, I need a loan. Okay, what do you have for collateral? I got this property. It's worth a lot of money. All right, how much money is it worth? Oh, it's worth about $3 billion, give or take. I was going to get you a big loan that you then have to pay back with interest. So even in the short term, it's only really good in a very, very short term. Then when you look at how the properties were valued, according to the judge in this case, the property they used as the example will be Mar-a-Lago. And they said that Mar-a-Lago, which is a very large property with literal coast-to-coast beachfront property. It's got beachfront on both sides. Was only worth $18 million. The properties adjacent to that were not worth that little. And they were only a quarter of the size. So the value the judge put in the properties was just absolutely ridiculous on its face. To the point, actually, where the other property owners around Mar-a-Lago are considering suing, if not the judge, the state in which that court is, which I don't remember where this is happening. Oh, wait, it says right here, Trump trial in New York. So they're actually considering suing New York because when they declared that Mar-a-Lago was only worth $18 million, their property values went down for being adjacent to it. Yes, the properties around your property affect the value of your property. Go figure. And Mar-a-Lago is also a business. A business which, according to public records, makes somewhere in the area of about $25 million annually. How could that property be valued at only 18? This has been one grand exercise in simply trying to strip him of his properties and hurt him as much as possible. But it doesn't end here. Because if they can do this to him, the question is then, who next? This is the foot in the door. And if we can simply remove people's property from them, not just through cancel culture, I mean, that's here to stay. That's not going away. At least not anytime soon. But if we can get the actual government to come in and say, you know what? Your right to property is suspended. We are taking your property. We're not going to let you buy any more property. We're taking your business licenses. We're not going to allow you to operate any more businesses. If you take someone's access to property and resources away, and then bar them from having any more, what is this except a government-sanctioned, government-operated exile and execution? Especially in this case, where it was done on summary judgment. So a summary exile and execution. It doesn't matter that they're doing it to him. It matters that they're doing it at all. And so that's where we stand right now. And that's why I wanted to have this talk, because you need to understand why life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness were added in the first place, to understand the significance of it, to then understand the significance of it being taken away afterwards. And if this is allowed to happen, if this actually does go through, where it goes from there. Because if this goes through, you will see it used more often. And the results of it are going to be, I don't even know. They'll be significant, I can say that much. Because once you do this to enough people, essentially what you'll be left with is a government that acts like a king. A government which says that your property no longer belongs to you. Your property belongs to us. Property belongs to us. You will do what we tell you to do with it. If we tell you to farm, you will farm. If we tell you to make clothing, you'll make clothing. If we tell you to do whatever, you will do it, because you have no choice. And you will have an entire population of people who will have no property, who will be forced to subsist off the land, to either work for the scraps that the government king allows them to have, or there will be an uprising. A peasant rebellion, if there were. And as we discussed earlier at the very beginning of this lecture, peasant rebellions tended to end in one way. Usually with the head of the king on a pike. That's what we look forward to if this is allowed to go through, and if this spreads like the wildfire that it certainly will be. So we'll have to wait and see. But now, you are aware of what's going on. You can now spread this information to other people. You can tell other people why life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness are important. And you can get other people to wake up to what's going on right now as well. Not, people like you, probably. And definitely not the people who just blindly hate Trump too. But if you can even convince one person that, you might not like Trump, but consider this. What if they allow this to go through? And what if we get a conservative government? Fully conservative. We get a Republican government or a Republican president in there, a Republican supermajority in Congress, a Republican majority in the Senate. What are you going to do when they come for your property now? Consider this. Trump's platform in 2016 was Make America Great Again. Trump's platform in 2020 was Keep America Great Again. Trump's platform in 2024 is revenge. I know it says here, Make America Great Again. It looks much better than revenge in a big backdrop. But he's been very public about that when he says that his goal, if he ever gets back in office, is revenge. Do you really want to give the Republicans all the tools to hurt people the same way you tried to hurt them? You would have thought that they learned this lesson with the Supreme Court, but they obviously haven't. They changed the rules for appointing Supreme Court justices, and Trump got to appoint 3 of them. Now they're trying to stock the arsenal with all kinds of legal warfare, lawfare, and they give no consideration to where this is going to lead in the future. Probably to their own detriment. I guess we'll wait and see. But that's all that I want to do today. We can make this go away. There we go. That's not a bad discussion. I feel like I made it through that pretty good. Let's see. JP says stool samples. I mean, technically they were. 2 kinds even. Tuck says, to be fair, if they're suing because the judge caused their property value to go down, I think it underscores the fact that there's a good reason to want your property value high. Well, there is. Of course, you want your property to be valued high because it's an asset. You bought it for X amount, you improved it, and so if you want to sell it someday or pass it down to your children, you want it to be worth as much as it really can be. If you overvalue it, however, now you're paying extra taxes that you're never going to get back, because if you overvalue your property and then try to sell it, let's say you have a property worth $1 million, but you come out and tell people, you know what? It's worth $2 million actually. Let's go even more egregious. It's worth $5 million. The first thing that anybody's going to do when they come to buy your property is they're going to have it surveyed. And you'll be busted for lying. Not to mention that if you overvalue it now and you ever have to pay taxes on it again, then you're going to be paying more in taxes. Or, what if you actually do get the $5 million you asked for? Now you have to pay more in income taxes and more in estate taxes and everything else. And you open yourself up for being sued afterwards for fraud. No, most people actually try to undervalue their properties. They say, you know what? I have a $1 million property here. It's a $1 million business. I really, really do not want more taxes. I'm going to say that my business is only worth $7,500. Or $750,000 rather. And then they'll send in somebody to evaluate your business, and they'll say, no, this is worth more than what you're saying. You bring in X amount in revenue alone. No, that's what people usually do. They're trying to pay less. And of course, you don't want to undervalue your property too much, because while you will, skip out on taxes, if it's your home and you undervalue your home, if you try to get a loan on that, you're not going to get as good a loan. No, there's really good reasons for keeping this all completely legitimate. You don't want to overvalue by too much. You don't want to undervalue by too much. You want to keep it right in that sweet spot. Tux also says the judge's assessment is clearly undervalued to a clown world degree. Agreed. He also says there's about 100 ways to value a property, all of them very subjective. That is also true, and that's why there's people who literally specialize in this kind of thing. So, that's where we're going to leave things off today. I wonder if I should find a way to put chat on the screen. There's not really that many chats. I don't think I really need to do that. I should look into it, though. Maybe. Maybe. But we're going to leave it off today. So I will thank everybody for coming out here. This was a really good discussion. I feel really good about it. Kind of a bit shorter, but I did warn that it might be shorter. Next weekend, I should be back here with something else. No, I'll be busy on Friday. I'll be here on Saturday. Okay, well, we should have another lecture next Saturday. I don't know what it's on yet. So I already threw this to the Discord, but if there's anything that you would like to discuss, anything you'd like to hear about, then leave it in the comments, leave it on the Discord. There's an entire channel dedicated to our lectures there, just to kind of keep it all separate. So if there's anything you'd like to hear about, let me know there. We can talk about it. I have opinions on just about everything. Otherwise, though, if you want to hear more of this, then subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, that way you get notified. I send out notifications myself, but hit the bell icon anyway. It works, for now. If you know somebody else who could also use this discussion, maybe they have some misguided thoughts on how the whole Lockean natural law or Jeffersonian natural law works, share it with them. They'll find it illuminating. Otherwise, though, if you just like me, leave a like on the video, leave a comment down below. I will see you next time, next Saturday for whatever lecture. I'll see you tomorrow if you're coming to the tabletop stream. And otherwise, I'll just see you later. And until then, take care.